We'll be spending the remainder of the session working through the Abba case. What I'd like to focus on primarily for the purpose of the case writing techniques session are the steps that you need to go through before you even begin to type up your response. The first step is to obviously read the case, and as you read the case, put together an outline. So a very important exercise I'm going to give you to do right now is the following. I'm going to ask you to read the case, and as you read the case, I would like you to do the best job you can of putting an outline together. This is your first outline, so you might find it somewhat challenging, but give it your best effort. Normally, you would spend somewhere between a quarter and a third of the time doing the outline. This is a 90-minute case, so I'll give you a third of the time, 30 minutes, and see what you can come up with. Remember to put each of the requireds on your outline as you read the case. Insert underneath the requireds the issues, and underneath the issues, and then next to the issues, also put in the salient facts. But when it comes to the salient facts, the important facts, either put them on the outline, or if there are a lot of facts, don't waste time putting them on the outline, simply cross-reference. There's tons of facts in connection with a particular issue, not efficient to put them all on your outline, much better off cross-referencing. Views and objectives most of the time is not relevant. If you think it's relevant in this case, you can certainly put it on the outline. Most of the time it's not relevant. Critical success factors are not relevant 90% of the time. If you think there's information available and it's relevant, put it on your outline. So the last two bullets may or may not be relevant. The first three definitely will be relevant. So please give it your best shot. It's now just a little after 8:30. I'll give you a half hour to work on this. What I would like to do now is I'd like to show you how I would have done my own outline. I'll also show you how I would have marked up my case as I'm going through the case. Not only do I do an outline, but I also write notes in the margin. I'll show you exactly what I write on the case. I'll also show you what I take to my outline. Finally, I'll also share my thought process with you. I'll try to tell you exactly what I'm thinking every step of the way. Okay? Now, for the purpose of showing you my outline, you're going to see my outline appearing on the side of the slide. In real life, I would be doing my outline on a piece of paper. Also, whatever I would be underlining in the case in real life, you will see highlighted. For the purpose of a PowerPoint presentation, it's easier to highlight than to underline. So whatever you see highlighted in my case, in real life, I would be underlining. I'm going to read the case and show you what I'm underlining. I'll show you what I take to my outline. I'll pretend that I'm a regular student. I've never seen this case before. That's what I'll pretend. So when I read the main body, I have no idea what's coming up in the appendices. When I read Appendix 1, I have no idea what's coming up in Appendix 2. I will try to pretend I'm just a regular student, and I will show you how I mark up my case, how I do my outline, and what am I thinking. Let's get started. UCPA are one of two partners in a firm of chartered professional accountants in a small research town in Western Canada. Susan Adams is a businesswoman and an old friend of yours from high school days back east. She moved to the mountains several years ago to enjoy life as a ski bum and discovered she had a talent for sales. I didn't really do anything with these first 4 lines so far. It then mentioned that she's now 31 years of age. Some of you might have underlined that as extraneous information. If you did, that's perfectly fine. I personally didn't, but when it comes to background information, it's very subjective what you underline. Some of you might have underlined that. It's information about the owner. If you did, that's fine. She opened a retail store, Head for the Mountains, HML, 3 years ago, and has been operating it successfully ever since. And then what they do is they finally give you some background information on the operations of HML. I said to you earlier that I typically underline detailed background information, whether it's on the operations of the company or the industry or the ownership. So here they're giving me information on the operation of HML. They sell high-end clothing and accessories for outdoor enthusiasts. I would underline that. It then goes on to say, I would underline it as background / extraneous information. It then goes on to say you obtain the most recently completed financial statements of HML. They refer to Appendix 1. I do not read the appendix right now. When they refer to an appendix, I wait until I get to the appendix. If you start looking at the appendices while you're reading the main body, you lose your train of thought. So the best thing to do is to wait until you get to the appendix. Don't look at the appendices while you're reading the main body. Finally, you've always prepared the tax returns from HML on the basis of the financial statements provided by Susan. Now, when I read that, the reason I underlined it, whatever you see highlighted in real life I'd be underlining, is I figured, why would they tell me this unless it's relevant? Why would they tell me that I prepare the returns and that she prepares the statements? Highly unlikely they would give you information on who's preparing returns, who's preparing statements, and it turns out to be completely irrelevant. So I underlined it on the basis that although I don't know why it's relevant now, it's likely to be relevant. When I get to the next paragraph, they tell me where I am in time. I'm told that it's now May 15th, 2018. I strongly suggest that you keep track of dates. Either put them on your outline, either circle them or put them on a timeline. Some people will put a timeline below the case. That's fine. Either works. If you want to circle. If you want to put them on a timeline, put them on a timeline. I'm circling dates. Now, in addition to circling dates, there are two dates that I would make sure to imprint on my brain. So in addition to circling them or putting them on the timeline, it'll be literally on my mind as I read the case. The two key dates that you must remember throughout the time that you're reading the case are where am I in time, because that could have an impact, and what is the financial statement date. The financial statement date is important when you're dealing with a financial accounting type case, which this is not, because anytime a transaction comes up, you want to ask yourself, was it before year end or after year end? So in a financial accounting type case, very important to continually, as you read the case, remember the year end. In any case, it's important to remember where you are in time. Other dates I would also circle and put on a timeline, but they tend to be less critical to remember as you're reading through the case. Let's continue. On May 15th, 2018, Susan meets with you to discuss a possible expansion. Susan begins, I've been asked by the manufacturers of Abba, a European company. I would have underlined that as extraneous. At this point, I have no idea why it's relevant that they're European, but I have a feeling if they tell me that, it's likely to be relevant. At this stage, there's no way I can know why this is important, but by the time I finish reading the case, we will know why it's important. It'll end up impacting more than one required. For now, I simply underline it as background/extraneous information. I underline it on faith that it's likely to be important. Anyhow, let's continue. So Susan begins, I've been asked by the manufacturers of Abba Clothing, a European company, to open a retail store in the small resort town where I reside. It then explains something about Abba's operations. I would underline that as extraneous information. Abba manufactures trendy clothing for outdoor enthusiasts. Now, what's going through my mind at this point is, isn't this interesting? Abba seems to be fairly similar to HML. HML sells high-end clothing and accessories for outdoor enthusiasts. Abba manufactures trendy clothing for outdoor enthusiasts. So what's going through my mind is these businesses are quite similar, but at this point, I don't have the foggiest idea why this is relevant, because I don't even know the requirements yet. I don't even know what role I'll be playing. So for now, I'm thinking they're similar businesses, but I have no idea why this is relevant. Let's continue. And is attempting to increase the distribution of its products by establishing Abba retail stores across Canada and the US. I've summarized some information on the Abba opportunity. And again, I don't bother to look at Appendix 2 right now. I wait until I get to Appendix 2. When I get to the next paragraph, I'm told Abba is anxious to reach an agreement before the end of May. All that's going through my mind at this point is that seems pretty soon. It's May 15th, 2018. They want to reach an agreement in 2 weeks. At this point, I have no idea why that's relevant to me. I don't know my role or required yet. Since it will have to manufacture additional product over the summer to meet the planned store opening of September 1st, 2018. Again, I tend to circle dates. If you like, you can put them on a timeline. Now, here we come across our first required. I don't know whether this opportunity is likely to be successful and would like you to advise me as to whether on an overall basis it would be a good business move to acquire an Abba franchise. So at this point, I wrote on my outline, advise whether Abba opportunity likely to be successful / an overall good move, right? You've been asked to discuss that. I would have put this at the top of my outline. I apologize, by the way. All I wrote in the margin was required, but in the WebEx presentation, it just got cut off. On the PowerPoint, it actually says required. Sometimes in WebEx, they cut off. So just understand this really should say RQD. The R is just missing. Okay, let's continue. It then goes on to say, there are a number of factors that are important to me. First, I would only be interested in acquiring the franchise if it'll generate strong income. Be very helpful if you would prepare a 3-year projected income. So here I have an overall very open-ended required. Now I'm getting given very, very specific to-dos, specific required I'm going to need to do in order to decide whether the Abba opportunity is successful. So the first required or specific required is calculate the 3-year projected income. I would throw that on my outline. It then goes on to say, I have enough experience to know that the success of a business is not just about numbers, so please also let me know what other factors I should consider in making my decision. So I leave some space, always leave space between required if you're doing it on a piece of paper, and then what I do is I put down the next required, other factors to consider. And notice I wrote down qualitative analysis. Clearly, I'm being asked for qualitative analysis here. She's saying, I know that it's not just about numbers, so she's really, without using the word qualitative, she's saying, tell me what other factors to consider. In other words, I want to see some qualitative analysis. Everybody with me, guys? A client will never use the term qualitative analysis, but that's effectively what she's asking for. She's asking for qualitative factors in addition to the numbers. Now that I know my required, I know I'm advising on this Abba opportunity, and I know that in addition to doing quants, I need to do qualitative analysis. Now I understand why they describe the two businesses, and now I understand why it's relevant that Abba and HML are fairly similar. Initially, I didn't know why it was relevant. Now I know why it's relevant. It affects my qualitative analysis. So under these factors to consider, I wrote down Abba similar to HML. And again, I apologize. WebEx tends to push things over to the left. This should be a little bit further to the right. On your copy, you'll notice it's a little further to the right. So guys, that would be an important factor that needs to be considered. The fact that the two businesses are similar. Tell me, is it a good thing or a bad thing that the businesses are similar, or is it both, good and bad? What do you think? Is it good or bad? Oh, by the way, it's I apologize. It's a 90-minute case. Okay, I apologize. The 70 is a typo. It's a 90-minute case. So guys, is it good or bad that Abba is similar to HML? Anybody? Nobody has an idea? So guys, if I'm going to be giving business advice on the acquisition, the fact that the businesses are similar could be good and bad. I'm seeing a lot of people have answered this, and a lot of you have hit the nail on the head. Guys, I would have said on one hand, it's bad because the business will compete with one another, and it's possible that Abba will cannibalize sales of HML, right? Abba will take away sales from HML. That would be the negative. On the other hand, it's also good because at the end of the day, she won't be familiar with the business. They're similar enough businesses that she has a better chance of making a success of Abba if it's similar to her current business. So basically, all I wrote down on my outline was Abba similar to HML. That's enough to remind me to discuss what I just said. I just write enough words on my outline to jog my memory. So the bottom line is, when I'm using this outline as my guide to write up the case, when I see the words Abba similar to HML, that will remind me to discuss the pros and cons. Some people may need to write more on their outline. Some people might want to write next to Abba similar to HML the word cannibalization to remind themselves. I find I don't need to do that. Just seeing these 4 words will be enough to remind me. Notice, guys, how up until we got to this paragraph, I didn't even know why it was relevant that the 2 businesses are similar. What I find often happens is I read information in the first 2 or 3 paragraphs and I underline it without knowing why it's relevant. Then when I finally get to the required, it becomes apparent to me why it's relevant. And that's exactly what happens here. After I get to once I know that I have to discuss factors in connection with purchasing the business, now I know why it's relevant. It's relevant because A, it could lead to cannibalization, that's a negative. On the other hand, it may align with her current business and be similar enough for her to be familiar with it, and we can use her experience productively. Let's continue. A second point that I put down on my outline, now that I know that I'm giving business advice, qualitative business advice, is the fact that there seems to be a rush to sign the agreement. Initially, I noticed that she has to sign it by the end of May, and it's already May 15th. So that's only 2 weeks, guys. Initially, I didn't know why it's relevant. Now that I know I'm playing a business advisory role, I now have another qualitative point. I'm going to warn her that it seems very rushed. 2 weeks doesn't seem like enough time to do adequate due diligence before purchasing this new business. Is everybody clear? So that would be another factor that needs to be considered from a qualitative perspective in acquiring the franchise. Okay? I'm not sure what you're saying, Iskar. You said bad because competition. I agree with that. And HML may have to shut down. You're saying we may not need. Is that your point? I think that's all part of the cannibalization point. Okay, I agree with you. It's all part of the cannibalization. Okay, let's continue, guys. So notice that we picked up 2 qualitative points already. Let's continue reading. The next paragraph says, here is an extract from the Abba Agreement. Once again, they refer to an appendix. I don't read that right now. I'll wait till I get to it. Does it look favorable to you, or do you see drawbacks? I put that down as another required, pros and cons of agreement. I actually treated it a little bit like a sub-required of the qualitative analysis, but if you want, you can look at it as an independent required as long as you deal with it. One point I noticed in the agreement is a requirement to provide audited statements in accordance with financial principles used by Abba, who, as you know, is located in Europe. If we went ahead with the expansion, I would, of course, ask you to be the auditor. Here comes another required. The next required says, do you see any issues in providing the audited statements that concern you? So in other words, if you have any concerns about doing the audit, I believe that in any case, I may need an audit for the bank financing. So I leave some space. I always like to leave space between required, and I put down the next required. Issues in providing audited financial statements for the bank. Okay? Mohammed, you mentioned the part about Susan not being in 2 places at one time. I didn't pick up that point yet because I didn't get to it. Remember, all I've read so far is part of the first page. At this point, I don't know anything about the 40 hours, okay? So remember, I'm pretending to be a student who's never seen this case. I can only put on my outline what I've seen so far. Okay, let's continue, guys. So we just picked up another required right here, which is basically to deal with any issues or concerns in providing the audited statements. And I also noted on the outline that we also need the financial statements for the bank. Continuing reading, we're told also, I'm not sure whether I can get enough funding from my bank and Abba to start up the franchise, or whether I'll require additional sources of financing. I'd appreciate it if you would figure out whether I need additional financing, and if I do, suggest possible sources from which I might obtain the necessary funds. So guys, when I read that, I picked up another required. The next required is whether enough financing available or additional financing is required. That would be the next required. And if additional financing is required, I have to cite sources. So once again, I put the required onto my outline. Continuing onward, we get to the final required. Finally, I have some tax concerns for which I could use your advice. So I leave some space, and then I put down the final required. By leaving space between each required, I can now slot in the relevant information under each required. So this is what my outline looked like by the time I finished reading the first page of the case. Let's now turn our attention to the first appendix. In the first appendix, we're given financial statements. Now, when I look at the financial statements, guys, first thing I see is the balance sheet. Now, for the balance sheet, at this stage, the only thing I picked up was cash. The reason why I noticed the cash is it kind of ties in with the financing required. She wants to know whether she has enough money to go ahead with this or whether she'll have to raise more money. The reason I circled the $40,000 is what's going through my mind is that Susan may be able to use some of the cash in her current business to help finance the new business. That's why I circled the $40,000. I thought it might be relevant for the financing required. When I got to the income statement, the first thing I would have asked myself is, why are they giving me an income statement? And what I thought was, the reason they may be giving it to me is she's about to possibly embark on a new franchise, which is similar to her current business. So I want to make sure that her current business is successful, because if it isn't successful, why embark on a new business that's similar? Is everybody with me? Why embark on a similar business if your current business is not successful? So one of the things I looked at was top line growth. I also looked at bottom line growth. Top line growth looked pretty good. If you annualize, I apologize that again, the WebEx has shifted over my number. You all have a copy of this PowerPoint in your binder, so it's clearer in your binder. If you take a look, guys, the 2015 year was only 8 months, and all I did was I annualized by taking 372,000 and multiplying by 12 over 8 to get 558. So top line growth looks pretty good. On an annual basis, from 558 in the first year to 625 in the second year to 698 in the third year. Bottom line growth also looks pretty good. Again, I just want to make sure the business is doing reasonably well before she embarks on a similar business. The reason why I decided to take a look at the cash flows that the business is generating, all I did was I took 107,000 of income before tax and I added back amortization to come up with cash flow. The reason I was interested in the cash flow is I'm thinking to myself, if she opens up an Abba franchise, it's very possible there'll be negative cash flow in the early years. Not at all uncommon. When you start a new business, very often you have negative cash flow. So I was interested in seeing whether there'll be sufficient cash flow in the current business to help with a new business should the new business have negative cash flow in the early years. That's why I did the cash flow calculation. Notice I also underlined the point at the bottom. It says wages and benefits do not include any amounts for the shareholder, although the shareholder works about 40 hours a week on the sales floor in addition to running the business. So guys, the first thing I noticed, I made a mental note of, is the wages don't include Susan's remuneration. It looks like Susan is remunerating herself through dividends. Mohammed, here is where I picked up your point about the, here's where I picked up your point about the 40 hours. Mohammed had earlier written me a chat that Susan cannot be at two places at one time. When I read the point about her being 40 hours a week on the sales floor, I put it as a point underneath other factors to consider. What's going through my mind is this could be a qualitative factor in discussing going ahead with a franchise. If she really is very hands-on and likes to be on the sales floor 40 hours a week, it's hard for her to be on the sales floor of both stores at the same time. So Mohammed, this is where I picked up the point about the 40 hours, okay? Now, if the car asks a very good question, he says the cash is at December 2017 and it's now May. So you're 100% right. I would have said she appeared to have cash at the end of 017. I would have said we should determine whether she still has significant cash in May. I would have made that very clear. But from the fact that she has cash at the end of the year, it means she may also have cash now, and we should check it out. That was the point I was trying to make. But you have an excellent point. Okay? Okay. Aditya asks, would you typically do this even if the statements are unaudited for all years? I'm not sure what you mean. Would I do what? What do you mean, would I do what? Maybe you can just explain. I'm not sure I understand your question, Aditya. Yeah, no, I would still do the trend analysis, but you can always say, assuming that the financial statements are reliable. If that's all you have to work with, you still do it. You know what I mean? But you can always hedge by, or qualify, so to speak, by saying, that by recognizing there could be errors, but this is all you have to work with. But I would still do this high-level analysis. Guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop right here. We've so far made it through the main body of the question and appendix number 1. This here is what my outline looks like. What you see over here is my outline by the time I finish reading the first appendix. Tomorrow night, we'll work through the remainder of the case and we'll complete our outline, and then we'll go through the remaining steps you need to do before you start typing up the case. And then after that, we'll focus on how to write the case effectively, how to write it up effectively. So I'd like to call it a night now, and we'll continue tomorrow night.